Hey.
Hi, David. It's the end of the week.
Hi, Charles.
And by popular demand, it's a Behind the Headlines episode. And everybody wants us to talk about, not everybody, but at least one person
At least one.
wants us to talk about the merger, the proposed merger between Kroger and Albertsons.
Proposed like 18 months ago.
It's still going on. Two giants in their own right coming together. And, Jeremy's got all these, behind the scenes, Jeremy gives us this big screen with notes, and the notes are never helpful because they always, get everything wrong. But let's try and use that as a way to guide this discussion.
Not very good argument.
Yeah, I don't even know what argument.
Yeah.
But the question is, it's interesting. I think what people were wondering is like, why? What? This is taking a long time. And, of course, we're not lawyers. We don't understand any of this. We're not even Americans, so we understand even less of it. But what are the kind of things that we have to think about in terms of the impact on the grocery landscape and all that stuff? So let's set the table and just point out that if Kroger and Albertson merged, I know they've already agreed to divest some 400
stores,
but that would still leave them with like a 4,000 or 5,000 store count, something like that.
Yeah.
I think it was about 10% of their stores.
10% to CNS
Wholesale. Yeah. And that would put them at the number 3 position in the U.S. grocery market, behind Walmart and Costco. And this is the Trade Commission, the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC of the United States, that's grinding this deal down as much as possible. And what do we think about all of this?
What do we think? Well, not from the antitrust concern, but really from the supply chain side, right? Or maybe
I do think, though, it is interesting to talk about antitrust. Only because, and again, I know a little bit of the sort of, first of all, common law has always had some form of review or some
over monopolies
for as long as common law has been evolving, and in the U.S. it was first, I think, the Sherman Act, and I think Mr. Sherman was a senator. And I think there's a pithy quote where he's like, if we don't want a king to rule over our lives, then we can't let there be a king ruling over any part of our economic lives. That was sort of the argument. But it was really in the 90s to the 1920s. There was through Taft and Teddy Roosevelt, where all of this antitrust sentiment grew, and there was a government that became very active in antitrust lawsuits. And I know this from my mining days, but it was Standard Oil that was like the headline company.
So
the Rockefeller I think it was in Cleveland, Rockefeller had Standard Oil. Everyone hated the essentially monopolistic control that Rockefeller had over the oil, the booming but still young
90%, because you brought that up, and I went to read, and they control 90% of the market share at the time.
That's crazy.
Yeah,
that is a crazy amount. But so they actually did force, the government did force Standard Oil to break up.
34 companies.
34 companies, but most famously something they called the Seven Sisters, the major.
Yeah.
So Chevron out in California, and Exxon in New Jersey, and Mobil in New York, and Amoco in Indiana. Names we still recognize today. And I think one of the things I remember from my mining days was the lesson, because all mining engineering professors are rabid capitalists, and so they were very much on the side of Rockefeller's side, but they would say, Rockefeller himself became vastly richer once they broke up.
Again, said the richest man in the world at that time.
Yes.
Even though his the market share, it did have an impact on their market share, but still made him filthy rich.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And in today's dollars, it would be mind-boggling.
Yeah.
It would humble Warren Buffett. Maybe not Elon Musk. I think it's probably, I don't know, probably in that area of the $200-300 billion range. Anyway, I think that's interesting just because it was about Standard Oil growing too big. The largest grocery chain in the U.S. is Walmart, as we've mentioned before, and there's not even a whisper about, hey, when do we break up Walmart?
Yeah.
And so the question I have is, if Kroger and Albertsons are going to join and become the third largest player, and we're not concerned, about the monopolistic tendencies of the two players above them, I'm not sure I understand why.
I don't either. I mean, the concerns that are being raised are around either the consumer, the workers, and the suppliers, right? And so we can take these and kind of either dismantle it or agree with it.
Or understand, yeah, right.
Or understand it. But I don't know if there's one that you prefer to attack.
You pick.
Okay, well, so one of the concern is around the suppliers, meaning that, for the large suppliers, those that have national coverage, that's not where the concern would be. It's rather with call it smaller players, one that a supplier that would currently sell only to one of the two. And on one side, you can say, well, there's an opportunity to grow their sales or revenue by having now access
by getting
to
shelf space in the other retailers.
But
banners.
Then also, what about those that may not have the capacity to do so? So yes, you have the opportunity, doesn't mean you can scale in order to do.
And presumably, if you gain shelf space at, let's say, if an Albertsons supplier gets shelf space at a Kroger banner, that does displace a small supplier elsewhere.
Yeah, because that's shelf space is limited. But I think if you think about grocery, I'm not sure this is maybe there are some cases that could happen, but it is also it could be not a strong argument because within those stores, I don't see a national chain where every single store is the same and offer exactly the same
100%.
Right? There is this local aspect of product that people enjoy.
I think sometimes people don't really understand how precise, how thoughtful store planograms really are. Yeah. So the idea, first of all, every large grocery chain has different banners built to serve different purposes, and different purpose means different demographics. I mean, if you open this, like to your point, this standard store, and it caters to just say a very, very normal middle income family, well, that is not going to work in a lower income neighborhood, and it's not going to work in an upper income neighborhood.
Yeah.
Like, they know this. They figured that out. They know that they need to look at the demographics within whatever you call it, a 15 or 20 minute drive, or their market that they're operating in, and they know how to be very particular. I find it weird, the idea that, let's say, like the great example, if I think of our first office ever down in Manhattan Beach, down in LA, Manhattan Beach, and there was a Vons and there was a Kroger, and so you have a great example of these two competing beasts. They were within a mile of each other. One was up on Sepulveda. The Californian dudes will really understand what I mean. Up on busy Sepulveda. The other was down by the Village, that had more foot traffic than it would, moms in minivans looking to get their weekly shop done. And you can tell from those stores that the buyers at the local level understood that. Mm-hmm. And so I find it hard to believe that, there's this transformation. Suddenly we're going to see all these products that cater that local clientele disappear from the store shelves, in the name of monopolistic. It doesn't make sense. And we know this because Albertsons and Kroger's are operating that way with that specificity already.
Within their own.
It is self-defeating.
Yeah, I agree. So we'll see on the supplier side. On the consumer side, then the concern is more about, either raising prices or because of not a monopoly, but another additional very large player, that this would have an impact because consumer have less choices. But I think on that angle, that's where we can talk really about the supply chain or distribution optimization, where, the grocery industry is one that has been actually very innovative, right? Working with very small margin. This is an industry where they are looking for ways to work as efficiently as possible throughout their supply chain before many other industries. And typically, because also the competition is quite fierce, that should continue to happen in order to bring potentially consolidations or facilities to bring costs down, which allows them to compete and then not increase costs, but rather at least control them.
I mean, Aldi's store count, I don't know where it's at right now exactly in the U.S., but I know 25 years ago, if it was over 10, I would have been shocked.
Yeah.
And the idea that a discount German grocer can open up what are they're not unpleasant stores, but they are not exciting. I mean, there's no frills, to quote another store banner. It's there because there's a market for people who just want to buy eggs at the cheapest price they can. So don't give me a fancy environment to shop in. I just want to go buy my eggs and milk and bread at the cheapest price. Aldi is hugely successful. And the thing about competition and your point about the margins in the grocery industry is, back to Elon Musk, if you are offering the world Starlink, it takes enormous amounts of capital and intelligence to build a competing product to Starlink.
Yeah.
To sell a head of lettuce, not really complicated. You put a farm stand out, you wait for people to park, buy lettuce and strawberries. It is where all the genius of the grocery industry goes into, is playing at the margins. It's playing in those areas. So, prices are not going to be, in my opinion, I don't think this is a big threat to price. If they suddenly got, piggish about prices, Aldi's going to take their place, and so on and so forth. New entrants the Korean grocery chains will happily go in. The Canadians will come down. Although, as we said, one of the things that is funny about this for us is we live in a essentially triopoly. We have three major national grocers, and there's no competition. The U.S. has vastly more. Just think, Trader Joe's, Whole Food Markets. Then there's always the ethnic grocers like Vallarta. I'm just focusing on California for a second, just because I know that grocery industry, that grocery market very well. Then you have the higher end folks, the Bristol Farms, those beautiful stores. A Pavilion, I think actually Pavilions is either I think it's a Kroger entity, or I don't remember. But anyway, so.
And then the third concern was about the workforce.
Right.
Again, not enough competition would drive wages down. Again, on that one, I'm not convinced either, right? When we were talking about efficiency and labor scarcity.
Go ahead.
I always wonder if I say that word properly.
Scarcity, you said it beautifully. But I was talking to Lori.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about Lori a little later in another episode. Hopefully in a few weeks we'll get her on to this, because her life story is so fascinating. But she is a veteran of the warehouse management and warehouse technology world. She worked for Ross Perot in the 80s, putting in first generation warehouse management systems. but she did this interview at ProMat for Supply Chain Brain, I guess last year, and the thesis that she was presenting is no one wants to work in your goddamn warehouse. It's a horrible place to work. You know, that's your problem. It is not, you know, the idea that you're going to be able to drive wages down, let's say in a grocery store. Good luck with that.
Yeah, good luck, exactly.
People are not going to work there anymore. And we can pretend that there'll always be this infinite supply of labor, but we all know that that is not you know, even in a soft market only means we have slightly easier ways of getting labor onboarded. So the idea that this merger will somehow affect wages, no, what will affect wages is the need to attract and retain people who show up every day and work hard. Yeah. And I don't think I don't see that. The other thing I thought was funny is this idea that, you know, both Kroger's and Albertsons are sitting on millions of square feet of empty warehouse space, and so that the supply chains can just collapse onto each other in this beautiful symphony of you know, consolidation. That is not how the world works. No one is running around saying, yeah, I just built 1 million square feet of freezer space. Let me go buy Albertsons so I could fill it up. I mean, that is just not how the universe works. They're all running at relatively thin or close to capacity operations. Yeah. And yeah, at any point in time, there's a new warehouse going up in their network because that's just the cycle of life. But that new warehouse is going to be half empty on day one, but the chances that warehouse suddenly can be filled up through the merger, even if it happens, you're talking about a 5% in total capacity.
Of the capacity, yeah, I agree. Well, so I guess conclusion is we don't think that this should be held.
What's holding it up? Let's just make it happen. You know? But then again, we're the kind of, we love the Davids, not this one, but we love the Davids and not the Goliaths.
Correct.
We know that that the consumer, especially in food, is always hungering for new, exciting, something that caters to their evolving needs.
Experiences.
And what will really make Kroger and Albertsons survive in the next 50 years is staying relevant to the customer, or it will die, merged or not.
Yeah, exactly. That won't make or break it. Well, good.
All right, let's get out of here.